You didn't fall in love with them. You fell in love with what they made you feel about yourself. There is a specific hour that people who have ended things they knew were wrong will recognize. It is not dramatic. You are not crying. You are just sitting somewhere, a couch, a bed, the lit rectangle of a phone, scrolling back through old messages from someone who is already gone. You tell yourself you are not doing this. Then you do it again. You scroll to the good parts. The sentence they wrote at 2 a.m. that made you feel, for one moment, as though you had finally been understood. The joke only you would have gotten. The voice note where you could hear them smiling. You put the phone down. Then you pick it up. Here is what makes this particular grief so confusing. You know intellectually that the relationship was wrong. You have rehearsed the reasons. You have told your friends. You have agreed out loud with everyone who said you were better off. And yet none of that logic reaches the place that aches. Because the ache is not about them. You know that too in the way you know things you cannot quite face yet. What you are grieving is not a person. It is a feeling of yourself that you have only ever found in one place, and that place is now closed. That distinction between grieving a person and grieving a version of yourself is not small. Most people spend years not making it. They go back. Or they find someone structurally identical and call it a new start. They ask their friends why they always choose wrong, as though the problem is a flaw in their selection process, as though the solution is to want different things. But wanting is not the thing that moves first. Something older moves first. And it moves without asking permission. What it moves toward is not a person. It is a mirror. And you have been standing in front of that mirror your entire life without knowing it was there. Think about the pattern. Not the specific person, the pattern. Because if you are honest with yourself, really honest, there has been a type. Not always a physical type, not always the obvious thing. But a quality, an atmosphere. Something in the way they moved through a room, or the particular way they went quiet at certain moments, or the sensation, and it was a sensation more than a thought, that being near them opened something in you that normally stayed closed. That quality is not random. You did not discover it in them. You recognized it. You recognized it because you already knew it, the way you know a song you have not heard since childhood. Your body remembered before your mind could ask why. That recognition, that shock of familiar, is what gets misread as chemistry, as fate, as the feeling that this person was meant for you. And in a sense they were. Not because the universe arranged it, because your psyche did. You were built, over years, to respond to that specific frequency. And when you finally encountered someone broadcasting it, every receiving instrument in you turned on at once. The most intense relationships of your life were not accidents. They were appointments you made with yourself long before you met anyone. And you had no idea. That is what makes it so hard to stop. You cannot simply decide not to feel it. You cannot reason your way out of something that was never reached by reason in the first place. There is something else beneath this that is harder to say. The pattern repeats not because you are broken, not because you are weak, not because you do not know better. It repeats because something inside you is trying to complete something. A loop that started before you had the language for loops. And every person who carries the right frequency trips the same wire. Not deliberately. Not maliciously. They simply arrive holding the frequency, and some part of you, ancient and urgent, says, "This one. Finally. This one." The tragedy is that you have been listening to that signal your entire life. You have made enormous decisions on its authority. You have stayed when you should have left, and left when you should have stayed, and in every case the signal felt more real than any reason you could construct for ignoring it. That is the thing you have not been able to explain to anyone who has not felt it. The signal does not feel like compulsion. Feels like recognition. Feels like home. And it is home, just not the home you think. What also makes this pattern so resistant to the usual interventions is that it tends to be self-confirming. The more you invest in someone carrying the frequency, the more evidence accumulates that this is the only place where a certain depth of feeling is available to you. The relationship fails. You feel more than you have ever felt in its failure. And so the pattern teaches you the lesson it was always going to teach, that this kind of intensity is the only kind that counts. You carry that lesson forward. It becomes the standard. And the standard makes it nearly impossible to stay with anyone who does not trip the same wire, because staying with them would require inhabiting a register of feeling that the pattern has never needed to develop. Carl Jung spent decades studying what pulls people toward one another, and more specifically what pulls people toward the same person wearing different faces across an entire life. He was not interested in love as a sentiment. He was interested in love as a psychological event, as a mechanism, as something the unconscious uses with a precision and a ruthlessness that the conscious mind can barely comprehend. What he found was this: inside every person, beneath the self they present to the world, there lives an image, a composite, an internalized figure of the opposite, not the opposite gender exactly, but the opposite principle, the unlived half of what they are. He called it in men the anima, in women the animus, and he argued, with the quiet certainty of someone who had watched the pattern repeat across hundreds of patients and across his own life, that this interior figure is not passive. It reaches, it searches, it casts itself outward onto real human beings and says, "There, that one." What Jung was pointing to here is not a poetic idea. It is a structural one. The anima and animus are not abstract soul figures decorating your inner life. They are functional. They shape desire before desire becomes conscious. They filter perception. They determine who you even see when you walk into a room, not in a literal sense but in the sense of who registers, who matters, who lights something up that others do not. Most people pass through your life like water through open hands. The ones who stay, who are held by this figure, by its recognition of something it has been looking for. In Aion, published in 1951, Jung wrote that the anima is a factor of the utmost importance in the psychology of a man wherever emotions and affects are at work. When you read that in the context of a relationship that broke you, the word affects does not mean mood. It means those moments when your self-regulation simply ceased, when something moved through you that was older and larger than anything you consciously wanted. When you stayed too long because leaving felt not like a decision but like amputation. The specific texture of that impossibility is worth sitting with. Because what you were losing in those moments was not a person. You were losing contact with an emotion that had rarely surfaced otherwise. A particular quality of aliveness, of being seen in a way you had not known you needed to be seen. The other person provided the conditions for that emotion to appear. But they were not the source of it. The source was interior and old and very patient. The anima or animus forms early. It forms from the specific quality of the first emotional environments, the tenderness or the distance, the consistency or the unpredictability, the way love arrived and the way it was withheld. It forms from the cultural imagination that surrounds a childhood. The stories told about what men are and what women are, what intimacy looks like, what strength means. It is assembled, piece by piece, from everything the developing self encounters as its first data on what the opposite carries. And then it goes underground. It becomes invisible. It becomes the standard you measure everyone against without knowing you are measuring. Taking this further than Jung explicitly stated, the anima and animus do not merely attract, they instruct. The qualities that make a particular person irresistible to you are almost always qualities you have repressed, undeveloped, or lost contact with in yourself. The woman drawn repeatedly to emotionally unavailable men may be drawn not to the unavailability itself, but to something underneath it, a self-containment, an interior life, a refusal to perform, that she has been told in some early and wordless lesson, is not available to her. The man who falls again and again for someone he cannot quite reach may be falling towards something he has declared off-limits in himself. A wildness, an impracticality, a permission to feel without managing the feeling first. This makes the projection something more specific than a mistake. It is a message, an attempt. The psyche, unable to find the unlived quality inside itself, reaches outward and locates it in another person, and then constructs a relationship around that location. The relationship is real. The feeling is real. The intensity is real. But what is being sought is not the person. It is the quality, and the quality belongs to you. You were 26 or 31 or maybe 19. The age is less important than the room, and the room is less important than what happened in it. They said something. Or they didn't say something, that is often more accurate, the specific weight of what they left unsaid. Or they looked at you in a way that made you feel for a second you did not deserve, that you were exactly the person you most wanted to be. Not better than yourself. Exactly yourself. Unlocked. That moment is the one you have been returning to. Not consciously. But every subsequent relationship has been held against it, the way you hold a piece of glass against light. And most things have not passed through. Most people have been fine, good, even, kind and solid and present, and you have felt nothing you could not explain. Nothing that broke the glass. And that absence, that damning absence of the feeling, has made you doubt everything. Made you wonder if you are capable of it anymore. Made you, in your worst moments, wonder if you were ever capable of it, or if that one relationship simply found a frequency you cannot reliably tune to. What you have never quite named is that the feeling in that moment was not about them. It was about you. It was the sensation of a self you recognized but rarely inhabited, warmer, more real, less managed. That person did not create that self. They created the conditions under which it briefly surfaced. They held the mirror at the right angle and you saw something you had forgotten was there and you called it love. It was love. But it was not love for them. It was love for what you saw in yourself when you were near them. And when they left, or when you did, knowing you had to, what went with them was not a person. What went with them was that angle. That particular quality of light. The evidence that this version of you existed at all. No wonder nothing since has replicated it. You were not looking for a relationship. You were looking for proof of yourself. And you only knew where to find it in one place. Marie-Louise von Franz, who worked alongside Jung for decades and whose understanding of the inner figures was, in some ways, more clinically precise than his own, pointed to something that changes the entire frame. What von Franz was pointing to in the feminine in fairy tales was this. The anima or animus figure in a relationship is not the point of the relationship. It is the messenger. The specific person you cannot get over, the specific quality that drew you to them, the specific devastation of losing them, all of it is a communication. From your own interior. About something it needs that it has not yet received. The relationship is the envelope. The message is interior. And the message is always the same. You are looking for something in another person that you have not yet found in yourself. The person you cannot get over is not a person. They are a part of yourself you have not yet met. This is not a metaphor. It is not a therapeutic reframe designed to make loss more bearable. It is a structural claim about what projection is and what it does. When you project the anima or animus onto another person, you are not imagining them differently than they are. You are genuinely perceiving something real, a quality, an energy, a way of being, that they carry. But you are perceiving it at a magnitude they cannot sustain, and you are making them responsible for something they did not agree to carry, the unlived part of your own life. That is why they always disappoint you eventually. Not because they are inadequate, but because no real human being can remain a projection. Reality wears through. The specific magic of the first months begins to flicker. You start seeing not the inner image but the person, with their limits, their fears, their small failures, the mornings when they are not luminous but just tired. And you feel, obscurely, that something has been stolen from you. When in fact what happened is simply this. You met a human being instead of a mirror. And you were not prepared for how different those things are. Here is the thing you have been circling without quite landing on. You have known for some time that the pattern is yours, not theirs. You have read enough, thought enough, talked through enough to have arrived at that understanding. And you have still not stopped. Which means the knowledge is not the problem. The knowledge was never the problem. Seeing the cage does not open it. What keeps the pattern in place is not ignorance. It is something that served you once and has not yet received notice that the season has changed. Because the anima and animus are not formed in adulthood. They are formed early. In the particular emotional weather of a childhood, in the specific way love was first encountered, its quality, its cost, its conditions. The image takes shape before you have language for it. Before you have the capacity to choose differently. It is built into you by the people who first showed you what intimacy felt like. And for most people, that early intimacy was not uncomplicated. Think about what the earliest experiences of being cared for actually taught you. Not the narrative you have about your family, the emotional grammar, the texture. Whether love came with a condition attached. Whether closeness felt safe or terrifying. Whether the person you most needed was also the person you most feared disappointing. Whether being fully seen felt like relief or exposure. That grammar becomes the template. And the template becomes the anima or animus. And the anima or animus becomes the thing you project, decades later, onto a person at a bar or an office or a friend's dinner party, and then call it fate. The cruelty of this, and it is a cruelty, is that the more unresolved the early material, the more powerful the projection. The people who had the most uncomplicated early experiences of love tend to have, in adulthood, a wider range of people they can genuinely connect with. The people who did not, who had to earn love or who loved someone frightening, or who were left at the precise moment they needed to be held, those people tend to have a very narrow frequency, a very specific type, because they were not just imprinted, they were trained. Trained to recognize a particular atmosphere as the atmosphere in which love is possible. And the part that is almost unbearable to sit with. That training produced a pattern that once had a logic, once kept you safe, or kept you in contact with love at all. You were not broken when you learned it. You were brilliant. A child's capacity to adapt to the emotional conditions it finds itself in, to map them and build a working theory of how love operates and what it costs. That is not pathology. That is survival. The tragedy is not that you learned it. The tragedy is that the lesson lasted longer than the classroom. Consider someone who grew up watching a parent oscillate, warm one week, withdrawn the next, present in moments so vivid they defined what presence meant, then gone in ways that left a silence too large to sit in. Not cruel, not absent in any obvious way. Just unpredictable in the specific way that teaches a child that love has a texture of almost. That the good moments are real but fragile. That you have to stay attentive, stay tuned to the frequency, stay ready, because when it comes, it is transcendent, and when it disappears there is nothing else like it anywhere. That child grows up. They fall in love with someone who is, they will say later, complicated. Who has brilliant moments and closed-off ones. Who is there and then not quite. Who gives them something no one else has given them but gives it in portions, in doses, in the way all things you cannot count on are both more precious and more maddening than the things you can. And that person feels like home. Because they are. Not the home they wanted. The home they already knew. There is a specific pain in recognizing that. Because it means the thing you were chasing, the feeling you have spent years trying to replicate, was, in part, a feeling of familiar longing. Of reaching for something that keeps the distance necessary to be worth reaching for. You were not falling in love with someone. You were falling back into the only emotional landscape where you knew how to feel deeply. What no one tells you about this moment of recognition is how long it sits before anything changes. You can understand the mechanism completely, trace it back through your history, name it, see it in motion, and the next week still find yourself drawn to the same frequency in a different face at a different bar. Understanding does not interrupt the pull. Not immediately. Because the pull lives somewhere the understanding doesn't yet reach. And so you circle. You know more than you act on. You recognize the pattern in the moment and then participate in it anyway, with the particular shame of someone who has read all the books and still cannot seem to close the distance between comprehension and change. That shame is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of how deep the pattern was originally installed. Here is where something shifts. Not because the revelation is coming. But because the way you have been framing the question has been, from the beginning, the thing making it unanswerable. You've been asking, why do I keep falling for the wrong person? And that question has a structure that makes it a trap. It assumes the problem is selection. It places the error in your preferences, in your judgment, in your ability to choose well. So you try to choose better. You make rules. You construct criteria. You avoid the type. And then someone walks into the room and carries the frequency, and all of it dissolves in under an hour, and you are right back where you started, hating yourself a little more for how quickly the architecture came down. The question that unlocks something different is not why do I keep choosing wrong? The question is, what is this pattern showing me about what I have not yet found in myself? But here is where it opens into something harder and stranger, and ultimately more useful than the diagnosis. The pattern was not just repetition. It was curriculum. Every person you projected onto, every relationship that consumed you and left you wondering what happened. Each one was showing you something specific about what remains unintegrated in you. Not punishing you, showing you. Jung believed that the unconscious is purposive, that it does not produce symptoms randomly, that the things which compel us, obsess us, break us open, they are not noise, they are signal. And the signal is always pointing somewhere interior. The person who kept being drawn to emotional unavailability, what they were being drawn toward, underneath the obvious pain of it, was often their own disavowed need for solitude, for interior life, for the permission to exist in themselves without constantly explaining that existence to another person. The unavailable partner was not the thing they needed, but the quality the unavailable partner carried, a kind of self-possession, a certain quiet that did not require filling. That was the quality they had not yet allowed themselves to inhabit. The person who kept falling for someone volatile, mercurial, excessive, feelings too large for rooms, moods that changed the weather, was often someone who had learned very early to manage their own emotional life with tremendous precision, to contain, to regulate, to stay calm when the people around them could not. The volatile partner, exhausting and terrifying as they sometimes were, carried something, an aliveness, an unmanaged intensity, a refusal to edit feeling before it arrived. And the person who kept returning was, beneath the anxiety of it, reaching for exactly that, the permission to stop managing, to stop editing, to feel something large and not immediately tuck it away. This is not absolution. Recognizing the curriculum does not mean the relationship was wise. It does not mean you should have stayed, or that the pain was worth it in some calculated sense, or that the other person had your growth in mind. They did not. They were living their own projection, their own pattern, their own unmet interior need. What you were drawn to in each other was not an invitation to health. It was a collision of two unconscious systems, each one trying to find in the other what it had not yet found in itself. But the question that changes everything is not why did I choose them? That question keeps you in the past, measuring the wreckage. The question that opens something is what was I trying to find? Because what you were trying to find is still there. It was never in them. It is in you. And it has been waiting, with considerable patience, for you to stop looking in the wrong direction. Now come the harder questions. The ones with no comfortable landing. If the quality you were drawn to exists in you, undeveloped, unmet, unlived, then the relationships that consumed you were not searches for another person. They were searches for parts of your own interior. Which means every time you left one of those relationships, you left not just a person but a map. A set of coordinates pointing somewhere inside you. And each time you entered the next one, drawn again by the same frequency, you were asking the new person to show you what the last one had briefly illuminated. What would it mean to follow those coordinates yourself? What would it mean to stop waiting for someone to arrive who makes you feel that version of yourself? That warmer, more real, less managed self? And begin slowly to inhabit that self directly. Not through relationship. Through attention. Through the patient, unglamorous work of noticing what you have been projecting and beginning to ask what it would take to carry it yourself. That is not a comfortable question. It asks you to sit with the parts of yourself that have always felt safest when outsourced. The wildness, the stillness, the intensity, the self-possession. To stop requiring a mirror. To look without one. The reason this work is so rarely done, even by people who understand precisely why it is necessary, is that the interior is not as immediately responsive as a person. A person gives you back signal, warmth, confirmation. A person allows you to locate yourself in their reaction. The interior is quieter, more ambiguous. It asks for a quality of sustained, undistracted presence that projection has always made unnecessary. Why sit with the unlived part of yourself when you can fall in love with someone who carries it? The projection is faster. The projection is electric. The projection answers you. And this is exactly why it keeps the pattern sealed, because it offers a counterfeit of what the actual work would provide, at a fraction of the cost and with a quality of intensity that the actual work rarely matches, at least at first. The question that brings you to this point is not, why do I always choose wrong? That question assumes a flaw in your preferences, as though the solution were better judgment, more careful selection, a checklist consulted before feeling. As though you could think your way out of the interior. The real question is quieter. And it is not about choosing. It is about meeting. Every relationship that consumed you, every person you could not get over, every love that felt more real than anything that came before or after. Each one was, in its own way, a visit from a part of yourself that has not yet been integrated. A part that exists fully in your own interior but has never been lived outwardly. Never been given expression or space, or the kind of patient, sustained attention that it takes to bring something unconscious into the light of the actual. Jung called this process individuation. The long, often painful work of becoming more fully oneself, not by acquiring new qualities but by integrating the ones that have been discarded, suppressed, exiled into the shadow or projected outward onto other people. It is not self-improvement. It is closer to self-retrieval. The return of parts of yourself that were sent away because they were, in some early climate, unwelcome or unsafe. And what individuation requires, the thing that makes it so difficult to begin and so slow to complete, is exactly what you have been giving to other people. Attention, longing, the willingness to be changed, the willingness to be disoriented, to have your ideas about yourself disrupted, to follow something not because it is comfortable but because it is calling. You have been willing to feel all of that, in relationship after relationship. The evidence of that willingness is in everything you have not been able to get over. The depth of your capacity is not in question. What is in question, what has always been in question, is whether you will direct even a portion of that capacity inward. Whether you will sit with the parts of yourself that surfaced in those relationships, the parts you only glimpsed in the mirror someone else briefly held, and ask what they need. Not from another person, from you. That is a different kind of relationship. It does not come with the intensity of projection, the electrical charge of encounter, the particular vertigo of falling. But it offers something those relationships never could. The object of your longing could not disappear, because it was always you. The interior work also changes the outer relationships, and not in the way people expect. You might expect it to make you colder, more guarded, less open to the pull of another person. In practice, the opposite tends to happen. When you have begun to meet the parts of yourself that you were projecting, the projection loosens its grip. And what becomes possible, often for the first time, is seeing another person as they actually are, rather than as the screen onto which you have cast your most urgent interior imagery. You can be near them without needing them to be a mirror. You can want them without requiring them to be proof. That is not a lesser connection. It is a more complete one, built not on what they reflect back but on what you can actually share. There is also something that happens in you, specifically, when the projection begins to withdraw. The qualities you were chasing, the self-possession, the wildness, the unmanaged intensity, whatever your particular frequency was pointing toward, begin slowly to become available from the inside. Not because you acquired them, because you stopped outsourcing them. Because you allowed them to exist in your own interior without immediately locating them in someone else. This is the quiet reversal at the center of individuation. The less you project, the more you become. The more you carry inwardly what you once needed externally, the larger the self that moves through the world. There is a specific moment some people describe, after years of doing this work, not the work of self-help or self-optimization but the actual interior work, sitting with what is uncomfortable, attending to what has been projected, slowly meeting parts of themselves they had sent outward into other people, when they realize something has shifted. Not that they stop feeling. Not that love becomes less real. But that the specific desperation is gone. The reaching. The need for someone else to be the evidence that a certain version of themselves exists. Because they have found it. Not by being told it was there. By meeting it. By bringing it into the room. This shift does not announce itself. It does not arrive with the clarity of a decision or the drama of a realization. It comes the way most real changes come, quietly and then all at once, and then you cannot quite remember what it felt like before. The person you were when you started scrolling through those old messages, looking for the proof that you had once been felt at a certain depth. That person is still you. But they are no longer the whole of you. Because you have begun to extend, inward, the same quality of attention you once gave entirely away. You do not need someone to make you feel real. You need to meet what you have been projecting. This is not a comfortable destination. It is not the arrival you imagined when you sat on that couch scrolling through old messages, but it is more solid. It is something no one can leave with. It is yours in a way that no relationship ever quite was, because the person you were waiting for was never on the other end of those messages. They were inside the phone. They were behind the screen. They were, as they always were, you, the part you had not yet learned to stay with, to carry, to call home. And the work from here is not to stop wanting. The work is to want in the direction that can actually be satisfied. If this is where your thinking lives, stay close. The work that matters most is usually the work that doesn't come with easy answers, and we are not here to offer those.